Good morning to all the students of class 9. Most welcome to all of you in this video lecture. This is Karunesh Mishra, subject teacher of social studies from Lakshmi Prasad Memorial Public School, Gola Bazar, Gorakhpur. Dear students, today we will discuss about the remaining. Today we will discuss about the remaining portions of the chapter 2, history, socialism in Europe and the Russian revolutions. So today we will discuss about the turbulent time and revolutions of 1905 1905 की क्रांति के बारे में हम लोग पढ़ेंगे और सामाजिक उथल-पुथल का जो समय के बारे में. So before of this I would like to give a quick recap to all of you so that you can recall that what you have studied till now. Dear students, as I have explained you that everyone in Europe was not in favor of complete transformations of society. Some conservatives thought that some changes were inevitable, but believed that the past had to be respected and changes had to be brought about by slow process. But the group of liberals lobbied to change the society rapidly. They wanted a nation which tolerated all religion. They also opposed the uncontrolled power of dynastic rules, but they didn't believe in universal adult franchising. So for radicals were concerned, they wanted a nation in which government was based on the majority of country's populations. Unlike liberals, they supported women's equality movements and opposed the privilege of great landowners. However, the group of liberals and radicals got support from many working men and women in the 19th century. Some nationalist liberals and radicals wanted revolutions to put an end to the kind of government established in Europe in the year 1815. In France, Italy, Germany and Russia, they become revolutionary and worked to overthrow the existing monarch. The idea of socialism attracted widespread attention in the mid-19th century Europe. Socialists were against private property and saw it as the root of all social ills of the time. However, they had different visions of the futures. Some believed in the ideas of cooperatives, others felt that cooperatives could not be built on the wide scale only through the individual initiatives. They demanded that government encourage cooperatives. Karl Marx was in favor of a communist society. He believed that the conditions of workers could not improve as long as profit was accumulated by private capitalists. Workers had to overthrow capitalism and the rule of private property. By the 1870s, socialist ideas spread through Europe. However, till 1914, socialists never succeeded. By the 1870s, socialist ideas spread through Europe. However, till 1914, socialists never succeeded in forming a government in Europe. Socialists took over a government in Russia through the October revolutions of 1917, the fall of monarchy in February 1917, and the events of October are normally called the Russian revolutions. In the year 1914, Tsar Nicholas II ruled Russia and its empire. He was a self-willed, corrupt and oppressive ruler. He ignored public welfare, as a result of which the conditions of the peasants and workers became deplorable. Becomes deplorable. Peasants frequently refused to pay rent and even murdered landlords, being influenced by democratic experience done by the Western European countries. The Russian also demanded a responsible government, but all their demands were turned down. Consequently, even the moderate reformers began to talk of revolution. The year 1904, 1904 में 1904 का जो समय था, the year 94 was a bad year for the workers. Price of essential goods rose very high. Wages declined by 20%. Workers therefore went on a strike, demanding reductions in the working day to 8 hours, and increase in the wages and improvement in the working conditions. In January 1905 और 1905 में जनवरी में on one Sunday, एक दिन रविवार को, the workers took out a peaceful procession, जुलूस निकाले, but when the procession reached the Winter Palace, they were attacked by the police and the Cossacks. Over 100 workers were killed and about 300 were injured. 100 workers मजदूर श्रमिक मारे गए और 300 घायल हो गए. This incident is known as the Bloody Sunday in the history. इतिहास में इसे खूनी रविवार के नाम से जाना जाता है. As a result of this incident, strike took place all over the country. इसके परिणाम स्वरूप पूरे देश में, पूरे यूरोप में हर जगह जो है हड़ताल हुआ. The incidents of Bloody Sunday brought severe consequences. Most committees and unions were declared illegal. Severe restrictions were placed on political activities. The Tsar dismissed the first Duma within 75 days and re-elected second Duma within 3 months. He didn't want any questions of his authority or any reductions in his power. So, in the year 1914, the First World War broke out in Russia. The war was initially popular and people rallied around the Tsar. As the war continued, the Tsar refused to consult the main parties in the Duma. Thus, he lost support and anti-German sentiments ran high. The Tsarina Alexandra, German's advisors, Rasputin, made the autocracy even more unpopular. The war had a severe impact on Russia. Bread and flour became scarce for the peoples in cities. By the winter of 1916, riots at bread shops were common. In the winter of 1970, dear students, in the winter of 1970, the conditions in the capital Petrograd were harsh. Petrograd was the capital of Russia. Petrograd were harsh. In February 1970, acute food shortage were felt in the workers' quarters. On 22 February, a lockout took place at a factory on the right bank river Neva. On Sunday, 25th February, the government suspended the Duma. On the 27th, the police headquarters were raided. The streets crowded with the people raising slogans about bread, wages, butter, bread, wages, better hours, and democracy. The Tsar finally abdicated his powers on 2nd March, and the Soviet and Duma leaders formed a provincial government for Russia. In April 1917, the Bolshevik leader Vladimir Lenin returned to Russia from his exile. He made three demands known as April thesis. These three demands were: war should be brought to an end, land should be transferred to the peasants, and banks should be nationalized. By Bolshevik party was becoming powerful. To reduce its power and influence, the provisional government began arresting the Bolshevik leaders. As a result, many Bolshevik leaders had to go into hiding or flee. The conflict between the provincial government and the Bolshevik became the cause of the October revolutions. The conflict between the provincial government and Bolshevik became the cause of the October revolutions. Vladimir Lenin in September began to bring together Bolshevik supporters for an uprising. When the uprising began on 24th October, Prime Minister Karunesh left the city to bring in troops to prevent the situations from going out of control. The October revolutions marked the beginning of Lenin's rule over the Soviet. With the Bolsheviks under his guidance, Lenin brought about several changes after these revolutions. For example, nationalizations of banks and industries, etc. By January 1920, dear students, January 1920 the Bolshevik controlled most of the former Russian empires, but their attempt to win over different nationalists were only party successful. Stalin came in power after the death of Lenin. After the death of Lenin, Stalin came in power. He started collectivization program to increase production. From 1929, all peasants were forced to cultivate in collective forms known as kolkhoz. The bulk of land and implements were transferred to the ownership of collective farms. Peasants worked on land and kolkhoz profit was shared. In spite of collectivizations, productions did not increase immediately. The bad harvest of 1930 and 33 led to horrible famines in which over 4 million people died. The impact of Russian revolutions was felt globally. In many countries, communist parties were formed. Many non-Russian from outside the USSR participated in the Conference of the Peoples of East 1920, and the Bolshevik founded Comintern, an international union of pro-Bolshevik socialist parties. By the time of the outbreak of the Second World War, the USSR had given socialism a global face. But the international reputations of the USSR as a socialist country declined by the end of the 20th century. Okay, dear students, so we came to know about, or we have launched that liberals wanted to end up the autocracies of the Czar. They walked towards demanding a constitution during the revolution of 1905 के जो है क्रांति के माध्यम से वे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन की मांग करने लगे संविधान की, which incident is known as a bloody Sunday in the history. So dear students, in the year 1904, price of essential goods rose so quickly that real wages declined by 20%. When 4 members of Kotilov iron workers were dismissed, there was a call for the industrial actions. Over 110,000 workers in St. Petersburg went on strike, demanding a reduction in working hours and increase in wages. This procession was attacked by the police and Cossacks. Over 100 workers were killed and 300 were wounded. The strikes took place as reactions. So people demanded a constituent assembly. The Tsar allowed the creations of an elected consultative parliament or Duma. The Tsar dismissed the first Duma within 75 days and announced the elections of the second Duma. The Tsar constituted the third Duma with the conservative politicians. The First World War and the Russian Empire. Dear students, in Russia, the First World War was initially very popular, but later support grew thin. Anti-German sentiments ran high. Russian armies lost badly in Germany and Austria. The war also affected the industry. There was a labor shortage. By 1916, railway lines began to break down. A small workshops were closed down. There was shortage of grain and hence of bread. The February Revolution in Petrograd, we have studied about these events. In the winter of 1970, Petrograd, capital of Russia, was grim. There was a food shortage in the quarter of workers. On 22 February, a lockout took place at a factory. Workers of 50 other factories joined in sympathy. Women also led and participated in the strikes. This came to be called International Women's Day. So women also led and participated in the strikes. This came to be called the International Women's Day. The government imposed a curfew. On 24th and 25th, the government called out the cavalry and police to keep an eye on them. On 25th February, the government suspended the Duma and the politicians spoke against the measure. On 27th February, the police headquarters were ransacked. Cavalry was called out again. An officer was shot at barracks of regiment and other regiments materialized votings to join the striking workers gathered to form a Soviet or council. This was the Petrograd Soviet. Delegations went to meet the Tsar. Military commanders advised him to abdicate. On 2nd March, the Tsar abdicated. Soviet leaders and Duma leaders formed a provincial government to run the country. After that, dear students, we have studied about इसके बाद हम लोगों ने अध्ययन किया about the February revolutions in Petrograd. What were the effects of February revolutions in Petrograd. The restrictions on public meetings and associations were removed. Soviets were set up everywhere. In individual areas, factory committees were formed which began questioning the way industrialists ran their factories. Soldiers' committees were formed in the army. The provincial government saw its power declining and Bolshevik influence grow. Therefore, it decided to take stern measures against the spreading discontent. It resisted attempts by workers to run factories and arrested leaders. Peasant and the socialist revolutionary leaders pressed for redistributions of land. Land committees were formed and peasants seized land between July and September 1917. The revolutions of October 1917. Dear students, let you know about these events. On 16th October 1917, Lenin persuaded the Petrograd Soviet and Bolshevik Party to agree to a socialist seizure of power. A military revolutionary committee was appointed by the Soviet to organize seizures. Uprising began on 24th October. Pro-government troops were sent to take over telephone and telegraph offices and protect the Winter Palace. In response, military revolutionary committee ordered the seized government offices and arrest the ministers. The Aurora ship sailed the Winter Palace. Other ships took over strategic points. By night, the city had been taken over and ministers had surrendered. All Russian Congress of Soviet in Petrograd approved the Bolshevik actions. By December, the Bolshevik controlled the Moscow, Petrograd areas. The revolutions, effect of the revolutions of October 1917. Dear students, most industries and banks were nationalized in November 1917. The land was declared the social property and peasants were allowed to seize the land of the nobility. Use of old titles was banned. New uniforms were designed for army and officials. Russia became a one-party state. Trade union were kept under party control. Okay, dear students, that's all. Thank you for listening me. More we will discuss in the next video lectures. I hope it is clear to you. Have a great day to all of you once.